The taxi was still waiting at the bottom of the driveway. Its engine hummed beneath the sound of gulls circling above the cliffs, and for several seconds, I considered walking back to it. Not because I was frightened of Martin. I had spent enough years being frightened of him. I simply needed one private minute before my face betrayed me. The house stood behind him in the pale afternoon light, unchanged from the outside. Gray stone walls. White-framed windows. A narrow balcony facing the ocean. The small copper weather vane my husband, Thomas, had installed crooked because he refused to read instructions. Everything looked familiar. That was what made it unbearable. The place still looked like mine. It simply no longer recognized me. "May I come inside?" I asked. Martin leaned against the doorframe. There was a hesitation. Small enough that another person might have missed it. Then he stepped aside. "Technically, I suppose you're trespassing," he said. "But for old time's sake." I walked past him without responding. The entryway smelled of fresh paint, leather polish, and the sharp citrus fragrance used by expensive cleaning companies. My home had never smelled like that. It had smelled like cedarwood, old books, and the lavender soap Thomas used even though he always complained it was too floral. The grandfather clock was gone. So was the narrow table where I left my keys. Two abstract paintings now hung on the wall, both painted in gray and black, as if someone had decorated the room to match a storm. "Where are my belongings?" Martin closed the door. "Storage, apparently." "Apparently?" "Your son arranged it." He walked toward the sitting room, speaking casually, but I noticed he kept looking back to measure my reaction. That was something Martin had done as a teenager. He never simply caused pain. He watched for evidence of it. The sitting room had been stripped almost bare. My green armchairs had been replaced with a white sectional sofa that looked too delicate to sit on. A glass drinks cabinet stood where Thomas's piano had been. I placed my handbag carefully on a chair. Then I turned to Martin. "Show me the deed." His eyebrows rose. No tears. No shouting. That was not the performance he had expected. "Straight to business," he said. "I have been traveling for 16 hours. I'm too tired for anything else." He poured himself a drink from the cabinet. "You always were serious. And you always mistook cruelty for personality." The ice stopped halfway into his glass. For the first time, his smile weakened. Only slightly. But it weakened. He set the bottle down and walked to the hallway. The framed document I had noticed from outside was not the original deed. It was a copy of the transfer record, displayed almost like a trophy. The buyer was listed as Vale Coastal Holdings. The sale price was $940,000. Nearly $400,000 below the property's most recent valuation. The seller's authorization was attributed to Daniel Hart. Acting under power of attorney. My power of attorney. I read the date twice. The transfer had been completed 6 weeks earlier, while I was in Lisbon helping my older sister recover from hip surgery. The power of attorney was real. I had signed it before traveling. But it had been limited to paying household expenses, supervising repairs, and speaking with my insurance company if an emergency occurred. It did not authorize Daniel to sell the property. At least, it should not have. I removed my glasses and looked more closely at the notary seal. Who prepared the sale documents? Martin took a sip of his drink. Daniel's attorney. Name? You'll have to ask him. I'm asking you. His expression cooled. The years had given him money, but they had not given him patience. I purchased a property through legal channels, Eleanor. Money changed hands. documents were registered. Whatever problem exists between you and your son has nothing to do with me. You bought a house worth more than $1 million for less than $1 million, from a man who did not own it. I bought it from your legal representative. You knew whose home this was. Of course I knew. He said it too quickly. That answer mattered. I looked around the room. The new furniture. The repainted walls. The framed transfer document placed directly opposite the entrance. This was not simply an investment property. Martin had wanted me to see what he had taken. That realization settled inside me with a coldness far more useful than anger. You knew I was overseas, I said. He shrugged. Daniel mentioned it. And you never contacted me. I wasn't required to. Legally? His mouth tightened. Don't begin imagining conspiracies because your son made a decision you dislike. A decision I dislike? My voice remained quiet, but something in it made him set down his glass. I buried my husband from this house. I nursed my mother in the room upstairs. I planted every rose along that driveway with my own hands. Daniel took his first steps in the kitchen. I moved closer to the framed document. He didn't sell an investment I happened to dislike losing. He sold 30 years of my life. Martin looked away first. Not because he felt remorse. Because emotion made him uncomfortable when he could not control it. That sounds like a conversation for your family, he said. You're right. I picked up my handbag. It is. As I walked toward the door, he spoke behind me. Eleanor. I stopped. When you speak to Daniel, he paused, choosing his words. Try not to destroy the boy over a building. I turned slowly. There it was. Not concern. Fear disguised as sympathy. Martin needed Daniel intact. Which meant their connection went beyond this house. What did my son promise you? I asked. His face became still. Goodbye, Eleanor. That was not an answer. But it was enough. The taxi driver had switched off the engine by the time I reached the driveway. He was standing beside the trunk, smoking beneath a cloudless sky. When he saw my face, he crushed the cigarette under his shoe. Everything all right, ma'am? No, I said. But it will be. I asked him to take me to the Harbor Grand Hotel. During the drive, the coastline passed in flashes between pine trees and vacation homes. Families walked along the promenade carrying ice creams. A woman in a red coat struggled to control two excited dogs. A young couple stood beside a stroller, arguing quietly, then laughing before the argument had even finished. Ordinary life continued around me with almost insulting confidence. I stared at my phone. There were 3 messages from Daniel. The first had arrived that morning. Call me when you land. The second came 30 minutes later. Mom, please don't go straight to the house. And the third had been sent while I was speaking to Martin. I can explain everything. People only say that when the truth is already visible. I called him. He answered before the first ring finished. Mom? Where are you? A breath escaped him. I'm at the office. What office? My company. I'll be there in 20 minutes. No, wait. You just traveled. Go to the hotel. I'll come to you. I'm already on my way. Mom, please listen. I ended the call. Daniel's company occupied the top 2 floors of a renovated warehouse near the marina. The building had exposed brick, black steel windows, and a reception area filled with young employees typing beneath hanging plants. A polished sign behind the front desk read, Northline Urban Development. Underneath, in smaller letters. Building tomorrow responsibly. I almost laughed. Instead, I gave the receptionist my name. Her expression changed. Not dramatically. Just a flicker of recognition followed by discomfort. She knew who I was. "Mr. Hart is expecting you," she said. Daniel appeared before she could call upstairs. My son was 38 years old, but in that moment, rushing across the lobby with his collar open and his face pale, he looked 12. The age he had been when he broke the neighbor's window and spent the afternoon insisting the wind had thrown the baseball. "Mom." He tried to embrace me. I stepped aside. His arms remained raised for a second before he lowered them. People were watching from behind computer screens. Daniel noticed. "Come upstairs," he whispered. "I've seen the house." His jaw tightened. "I know." "You know?" Martin called. Of course he had. Not to apologize. To prepare Daniel. My son guided me toward a glass conference room on the second floor. The blinds were partly open, and through them I could see employees pretending not to look. Daniel closed the door. The room smelled of coffee, printer toner, and the expensive cologne Thomas had once told him was too strong. "Sit down," Daniel said. I remained standing. He paced to the window. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Silence had always made Daniel nervous. As a child, he filled it with questions. As an adult, he filled it with excuses. The company was in trouble, he began. I placed my handbag on the conference table. "So you sold my home." "We needed capital quickly." "You sold my home." "I heard you the first time." His voice sharpened, then softened almost immediately. "Sorry. I haven't slept properly in weeks." Neither had I, but I did not mention it. "How did you alter the power of attorney?" "I didn't alter anything." "Then how did you use a limited authorization to transfer my property?" "The version registered with the attorney allowed asset management." "Asset management is not the sale of my primary residence." "You weren't living there permanently." I stared at him. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. "That came out wrong." "No. It came out honestly." He pulled out a chair and sat. "I thought you were going to stay in Europe longer." "With my sister?" "You always said you loved Lisbon." "Loving a city does not mean I moved there." "You had talked about downsizing." "I talked about converting the upstairs bedroom into a smaller living space when my knees became worse." "I did not give you permission to sell the building beneath it." His eyes dropped to the table. That small movement hurt more than if he had shouted. He knew exactly what he had done. "How much did Martin give you privately?" I asked. Daniel's head lifted. "What?" "The recorded sale price was far below market value." "Either you are a terrible negotiator, or another agreement exists." "There was no private payment." "Then why Martin?" "He was willing to move quickly." "Why was he involved with your company?" Daniel froze. Only for half a second. But mothers learn to read half seconds. "He isn't involved. He told me not to destroy you over the house." He was being decent. Martin Vale has never confused decency with opportunity. Daniel stood abruptly. "You don't know him anymore." "And you do?" "We've done business together." There it was. Not a friend. Not simply a buyer. A business associate. "How much of this company does he own?" "He doesn't own any of it." "Daniel." "He provided bridge financing." "Against what security?" Daniel walked to the window. Below us, Boats rocked gently against the marina docks while a delivery truck reversed through the alley, beeping at regular intervals. He kept his back to me. I knew that posture. Thomas used to call it Daniel's closed door. Whenever he was ashamed, he turned away so he could pretend the other person had disappeared. How much? I asked again. 2 million. And the house? Part of the agreement. What agreement? He would provide the financing if I arranged the property sale. To him. Yes. At a discount. He took the risk. I studied the back of my son's head. The expensive haircut. The carefully tailored jacket. The posture of a man trying to make theft sound like negotiation. What exactly is Northline building? I asked. He turned around. Why does that matter? Because you said you needed capital. I want to know what was important enough to justify leaving your mother without a home. His face tightened. You aren't homeless. Where do I live tonight? You have money. That was not my question. I booked you a suite at the Harbor Grand. For how long? As long as you need. With whose money? His silence answered me. The company's. Or Martin's. Possibly both. I took a slow breath. Tell me about the venture. Daniel moved toward the table and spread his hands across the polished surface. We're redeveloping the old South Harbor district. Apartments, retail space, a public walkway. The council wants new investment. Once the permit's clear, the project will triple the company's value. And until then? We manage cash flow. By selling things that do not belong to you? His eyes flashed. I was trying to save everything I built. You did not build that company alone. I never said I did. You asked me for the original seed money. That was 12 years ago. I introduced you to your first 3 investors. Your father guaranteed the lease on your first office. I reviewed every contract during your first 18 months because you could not afford legal staff. He pushed away from the table. So this is about credit? No. This is about memory. I walked toward him. You have rewritten your life until you are the only person responsible for your successes and everyone else is responsible for your failures. That isn't fair. Neither was arriving home to find my bully drinking in my sitting room. Daniel's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The anger left his face, replaced by something smaller. Guilt, perhaps. Or simply exhaustion. I was going to buy it back, he said. I waited. When the permits came through and the company's valuation increased, I was going to buy the house back from Martin. You believed that? We had an understanding. Is it written down? He looked away. Daniel. He gave me his word. A bitter sadness moved through me. My son had not only betrayed me. He had done it for a promise from a man who had built his entire life around exploiting weakness. Did you know Martin bullied me? I asked. Daniel lowered himself into a chair. You mentioned it. I mentioned it? You never told me all the details. You never asked. His fingers tightened together. What did he do? For a moment, I considered telling him. About the ink poured into my school bag. The dead bird left inside my locker. The rumor Martin spread after I rejected him at 17. The months of walking through corridors while students whispered words I had been too young to understand. About the afternoon he blocked the stairs and told me that no one would ever believe a quiet girl over the mayor's son. But Daniel was not asking because he wanted to know me. He was asking because he wanted to calculate whether his betrayal could still be defended. It no longer matters what he did then, I said. It matters what you did now. His eyes filled, but he blinked the emotion away. Mom, I made a mistake. No. I said it gently. That seemed to hurt him more. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. Missing an exit. Signing the wrong page. You contacted an attorney, arranged an undervalued sale, emptied my home, moved my belongings, accepted financing, and warned everyone except me. I picked up my handbag. That is not a mistake, Daniel. It is a sequence of decisions. He stood. What are you going to do? At last. The honest question. Not whether I was all right. Not where I would sleep. Not whether he could repair what he had broken. What are you going to do? I looked at my son and realized he was afraid of me. Not because I had threatened him. Because somewhere beneath all his arrogance, Daniel remembered who I had been before motherhood softened the edges of my life. For 27 years, I had worked in corporate restructuring. I had entered companies when the money disappeared, when executives lied, when partners turned against one another and everyone insisted the disaster had been caused by someone else. My job had never been to shout. It had been to find the truth hidden inside the numbers. Daniel knew that. He simply believed I had become too old to use it. I'm going to sleep, I said. His confusion was immediate. That's it? For tonight. You're not calling the police? Should I? His throat moved. I'm asking what you're planning. And I'm telling you I'm tired. I opened the conference room door. Daniel followed me into the corridor. Mom, please. We can work this out privately. Several employees looked up. He lowered his voice. If this becomes public, the company could collapse. I turned toward him. There were dark circles under his eyes. A faint coffee stain marked the edge of his cuff. Behind him, through another glass wall, two men were arguing over a spreadsheet while a young woman repeatedly refreshed something on her computer. This did not look like a company preparing to triple in value. It looked like a company trying to survive until Friday. Then perhaps, I said, you should have considered that before using stolen property as collateral. It wasn't collateral. What was it? Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. That was the second hesitation I had noticed that day. Martin's had told me he feared my questions. Daniel's told me the house was not the worst thing he had hidden. I'll call you tomorrow, I said. Mom. Do not move my belongings. Do not destroy any documents. And do not speak to the attorney who handled the sale until my lawyer contacts you. His face drained of color. You already have a lawyer? Not yet. The elevator doors opened. But I know several who answer my calls. At the Harbor Grand, the receptionist greeted me with the careful warmth reserved for people whose rooms had already been paid for by someone wealthier. My suite overlooked the marina. Fresh flowers stood on the table. A bottle of champagne rested in an ice bucket beside a card from Daniel. I'm sorry. Please give me a chance to fix this. I placed the card face down. Then I called the storage company listed in the documents Martin had reluctantly allowed me to photograph. The manager confirmed that my belongings were safe. He also confirmed something else. Daniel had booked the smallest available unit. My furniture did not fit. Several items had therefore been sent to auction. The sale had taken place 9 days earlier. Thomas's piano. My mother's dining table. The cedar chest containing 40 years of family letters. All sold. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, still holding the phone. For the first time that day, my control slipped. Not loudly. There was no scream. No shattered glass. I simply pressed my palm over my mouth and bent forward until my forehead nearly touched my knees. The house could be challenged in court. Money could be traced. Contracts could be reversed. But somewhere, a stranger was touching the piano keys Thomas had played every Sunday morning. Someone was eating dinner at the table where my mother had taught Daniel to read. Objects are not people. I knew that. But grief has never respected logic. I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes. Then I washed my face. Changed out of my travel clothes. Ordered black coffee. And opened my laptop. I searched Northline Urban Development. The public website was impressive. Glossy renderings. Smiling families. Sustainable buildings covered in rooftop gardens. Daniel standing beside council officials with a silver shovel in his hand. But public images are designed to show confidence. Financial records tell you where confidence ends. I searched planning applications. Property liens. Court filings. Contractor disputes. The deeper I looked, the quieter the room seemed to become. 2 subcontractors had filed claims for unpaid invoices. A lender had registered additional security against Northline's existing properties. The South Harbor permits Daniel claimed were almost approved had been delayed twice over environmental concerns. And 3 weeks earlier, Northline's chief financial officer had resigned without explanation. At 11:47 that night, I called someone I had not spoken to in nearly 4 years. Arthur Bell had once been the youngest analyst on my restructuring team. He was now a senior partner at a private investment firm in Boston. He answered with a sleepy voice. "Eleanor? I need a favor." There was a pause. Then the sound of a lamp switching on. "What kind?" "I need you to look at a company." "Tonight?" "Yes." He heard something in my voice and stopped joking. "Send me the name." Northline Urban Development. Another pause. This one was different. "You know them?" "Should I?" Arthur exhaled slowly. "Eleanor, why are you asking about Northline?" "My son owns it." The silence stretched. Outside my hotel window, a ferry moved across the dark water, its lights trembling in the waves. Finally, Arthur spoke. "Your son doesn't own that company anymore." I sat straighter. "What do you mean?" "We reviewed Northline 6 months ago for a distressed assets client. Daniel still has his title, but the voting rights are tied up in emergency financing agreements." "With Martin Vale?" "I don't recognize that name. But whoever controls the debt can take the company if Northline misses its next payment." "When is the payment due?" I heard Arthur typing. "Give me a second." The clock beside the bed changed from 11:59 to midnight. When Arthur spoke again, his voice was quiet. "Friday. 4 days away." I looked at Daniel's apology card lying face down beside the untouched champagne. My son had not sold my home to build his future. He had sold it because his future was already collapsing. And Martin Vale had not purchased my house simply to humiliate me. He had purchased leverage. The only question was what he planned to take next. I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection in the dark window. That morning, I had returned home believing I was a retired widow with a peaceful life waiting for me. By midnight, I understood that peace had been an illusion. My son had gambled my past. Martin controlled his present. And somewhere inside Northline's accounts was the truth they were both desperate to hide. Before I tell you what I found, ask yourself one question. If your own child sold the home you built with your husband, would you confront them immediately? Or stay silent long enough to discover what else they had taken? Let me know in the comments. Because the next morning, I did not call the police. I did not call Daniel. And I did not demand my house back. I disappeared. The next morning, I vanished. Not dramatically. I did not switch off my phone, leave the country, or withdraw cash under a false name. Real disappearance is often much simpler. You stop explaining yourself. You stop reacting where people can see. And you allow everyone who underestimated you to become comfortable again. At 7:15, I checked out of the Harbor Grand. The receptionist looked surprised when I declined the car Daniel had arranged. "Mr. Hart reserved the suite for 2 weeks," she said. "I won't need it. Would you like us to refund the remaining nights to his card?" "No." I adjusted the strap of my handbag. "Refund them to the company." Her fingers paused above the keyboard. "Northline Urban Development?" "Yes." I wanted the transaction recorded. A hotel refund was a small thing, but small things reveal direction. If Northline was truly as desperate for cash as Arthur suspected, the money would disappear into an overdraft within hours. If Daniel had paid personally, the refund would tell me he still had resources he had not disclosed. Either way, I would learn something. I took a taxi to a residential neighborhood on the north side of the city. The buildings there were older, built from dark brick, with shallow steps and narrow balconies overlooking streets lined with maple trees. My friend Ruth Caldwell lived on the 3rd floor of one of them. Ruth and I had worked together for 11 years before she became a commercial litigation attorney. She had retired 2 years before me, though retirement had not stopped her from reading legal journals over breakfast and correcting television courtroom dramas aloud. She opened the door wearing a blue robe and one gardening glove. "Eleanor? I'm sorry. I should have called." She stared at my suitcase. Then at my face. "You look terrible. That is why we have remained friends for 40 years. Come inside." Her apartment smelled of toast and damp soil. Several pots of herbs covered the kitchen counter, and a radio presenter was calmly discussing traffic conditions as if nobody's life had collapsed overnight. Ruth poured coffee without asking questions. She waited until I had taken the first sip. Then she sat across from me. "What happened?" "My son sold my house." She blinked once. "Your house?" "To Martin Vale." The coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "Martin from school?" "Yes." "That Martin?" "There was only ever one." Ruth lowered the cup. "Start at the beginning." I told her everything. The failed key. The altered authorization. The discounted sale. Martin's financing agreement with Northline. The storage auction. The debt payment due Friday. Ruth listened without interrupting, except once, when I mentioned the piano. Her face tightened. "He sold Thomas's piano?" "Daniel sent it to auction." "Where is your son now?" "At his office, I assume." "Good." She reached for her phone. "Why is that good?" "Because it gives the police a fixed address." I placed my hand over the phone. "Not yet." Ruth stared at me. "Eleanor, your property was transferred using an authorization that may have been altered. Your belongings were disposed of, and your son appears to have received business financing in exchange. This is not a family misunderstanding." "I know." "Then why are you protecting him?" "I'm not. That is what waiting looks like from this side of the table." I removed the photographed documents from my bag and placed them between us. If I report Daniel now, Martin will claim he was an innocent buyer. The company's records will be locked down. Attorneys will appear. Phones will be replaced. Emails will vanish. Deleting evidence after notice would make matters worse for them. Only if we can prove what existed before it disappeared. Ruth leaned back. You think the house is part of something larger. I think Martin wanted it too much. He bullied you 40 years ago. Perhaps he simply enjoyed humiliating you. He did. I looked through the kitchen window at a delivery cyclist fastening his helmet. But Martin never wastes cruelty when money can do the same job. Ruth picked up the transfer copy. The notary seal was visible in the lower corner. Did you speak to this notary? Not yet. Do you know the attorney? Graham Pike. Her eyes lifted. You know him? I know of him. That expression usually means something unpleasant. He handles distressed property transfers. Quick closings, private lenders, assets with complicated ownership. Legitimate? Technically. She examined the document more closely. The most dangerous professionals are often technically legitimate. I finally allowed myself to breathe. That was why I had come to Ruth. She understood the space between legal and honest. What do you need? She asked. A quiet place to stay. A legal review. And someone who will tell me when I'm being foolish. You have always ignored the third service. But I value its availability. Her mouth softened. You can use the spare room. Only for a few days. You can stay as long as necessary. I looked down at my coffee. Kindness was harder to receive than sympathy. Sympathy keeps its distance. Kindness notices where you will sleep. Thank you, I said. Ruth folded the documents. I'll contact the county registry and request the complete filing package. We also need your original power of attorney. It should be with my estate documents. Where? In the cedar chest. The room became quiet. The cedar chest had been sold at auction. Ruth reached across the table. Then we find the buyer. By 10:30, the search for my belongings had begun. The storage company manager gave us the auction firm's name only after Ruth explained that the property disposal might become part of a criminal investigation. The auction house had divided everything into separate lots. My dining table had gone to a restaurant owner. The piano had been purchased by a music teacher. The cedar chest had been sold to an anonymous online bidder. The auction house would not release the bidder's identity without a subpoena. But it confirmed the chest had not yet been collected. It was sitting in a warehouse less than 6 miles away. Ruth looked at me across the kitchen table. We can request an emergency order. That could alert Daniel. It would also stop the chest from leaving. I thought for a moment. How much did it sell for? She checked the email. $420. I'll buy it back. The bidder may refuse. Then offer $800. Ruth gave me a disapproving look. Eleanor. $1,000. You should not have to pay for your own property. No. I shouldn't. I closed the laptop. But today I need the documents more than I need fairness. The auction house contacted the bidder. 20 minutes later, it called back. The buyer accepted $1,200. Ruth muttered something unkind about opportunists. I paid without argument. By noon, we were driving toward the warehouse in Ruth's aging station wagon. Rain had begun to darken the pavement. The city looked different through the wet windshield, office towers blurred into gray shapes, traffic lights spread across the glass, pedestrians moved beneath umbrellas like figures in a painting. The auction warehouse stood behind an industrial laundry and a vacant furniture store. Inside, rows of discarded lives waited beneath fluorescent lights. Dining sets. Framed wedding photographs. Children's bicycles. Boxes labeled with names nobody there knew. The clerk rolled my cedar chest toward us on a metal cart. A strip of yellow tape ran across the lid. My mother's initials were still carved near the brass latch. For a second, I could not touch it. I remembered sitting beside that chest at 7 years old while she packed winter blankets. She had told me every family needed one place where it kept the things it could not replace. Apparently, she had not considered sons. "Would you like help loading it?" the clerk asked. "No," I said. Then, after looking at Ruth's back and my own hands, I reconsidered. Yes. We opened the chest in Ruth's living room. The letters were still there. Thomas's military papers. Daniel's childhood drawings. My mother's recipe book. And underneath a folded wool blanket, the red document box containing my will, insurance policies, and original power of attorney. Ruth placed the copy from the house beside the original. The first page looked identical. The second did not. My original authorization contained 5 listed powers. The filed version contained 6. The extra paragraph granted Daniel the authority to sell, transfer, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of any real property held in my name. My initials appeared beside it. They were convincing. But they were not mine. Ruth photographed both versions. "This is enough to challenge the transfer. Is it enough to prove who changed it?" "Not yet." She pointed to the notary block. "The filing claims you signed this amended version 3 days before leaving for Lisbon. I was already in New York that day. Can you prove it?" My flight left from New York the following morning. I stayed with my sister's daughter overnight. Receipts? Train ticket. Hotel dinner. Possibly security camera records. Ruth's expression sharpened. "If you can establish that you were in another state when the amendment was notarized, somebody has a serious problem." "Daniel?" "Daniel." "The notary." "Pike." "Perhaps all 3. I studied the forged initials. They were neat. Mine were never neat. Someone had copied the shape but not the pressure. A signature carries hesitation when it is performed by a stranger. This one looked careful. Too careful. Ruth touched my wrist. "You can stop protecting him now." "I told you, I'm not protecting him." "What would you call it?" "Choosing the correct order." She sighed. "You sound exactly like you did in board meetings." That was usually when people listened. People listened because you scared them. Only the dishonest ones. Ruth stood and walked toward the window. "I need to say something, and you will dislike it. That has never stopped you. Your son may go to prison." The words entered the room without drama. No music. No thunder. Just rain tapping the glass. I looked at one of Daniel's drawings from the chest. He had been 6 when he made it. 3 stick figures standing outside a square blue house. Thomas on one side. Me on the other. Daniel between us, holding both our hands. Above the roof, he had written, "Our home forever." I placed the drawing face down. "I know," I said. That afternoon, Arthur called. His analysts had performed a preliminary review using public filings and lender databases. Northline's condition was worse than he had expected. The company had borrowed heavily against 3 development sites. Construction costs had increased. 2 investors had withdrawn. The South Harbor project was not merely delayed, it had lost a major tenant whose lease commitment had been used to support the financing. Without that tenant, Northline's projected revenue no longer justified its debt. "How close are they to insolvency?" I asked. Days, not months. I moved to Ruth's small office so she could work in the living room. The shelves were crowded with law books and photographs of her grandchildren. Who controls the emergency financing? That is the interesting part, Arthur said. The lender is called Meridian Bridge Capital. Who owns it? A series of holding companies. Beneficial owner? Still tracing it. Any connection to Martin? Not on paper. Then keep looking. Arthur hesitated. There's another issue. What? Northline's debt documents contain a change of control clause. In whose favor? The lender's. If Northline defaults, Meridian can convert part of the debt into voting shares and replace management. Daniel included that? He may not have had a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not when payroll is due. I closed my eyes briefly. Daniel had always believed pressure excused surrender. At 16, he borrowed my car without permission because his friends were waiting. At 22, he signed a lease he could not afford because the landlord offered a discount that expired at midnight. His worst decisions often began with urgency. People who cannot tolerate short-term embarrassment become vulnerable to long-term ruin. When is payroll? I asked. Thursday. The debt payment is Friday. Yes. How much cash do they need? Approximately $3.6 million to satisfy both. I looked at the rain moving down the window. And if they miss payroll? Employees talk. Vendors panic. The lender accelerates. Which means the company falls into Meridian's hands before the permits are decided. That appears to be the structure. I felt the first true shape of Martin's plan. The discounted house. The private financing. The company debt. The timing. He had not helped Daniel save Northline. He had helped him survive long enough to accumulate more control. Arthur, find out whether Martin has been purchasing property near South Harbor. I'll check. Not under his name. Search trusts, family members, corporate addresses, shared attorneys. You're assuming the project is valuable despite the company's problems. I'm assuming Martin believes it is. And if he owns Meridian? Then he plans to take Northline after Daniel carries the political and financial risk. Arthur was quiet. You've been retired too long. Why? You sound happy. I am not happy. No. But you sound awake. The observation unsettled me. I ended the call soon afterward. At 4:30, Daniel began calling. First my mobile phone. Then Ruth's home number. Then my email. I did not respond. His messages changed as the afternoon passed. Mom, I'm worried. Then, please tell me where you are. Then, Martin says you threatened him. I had not threatened Martin. That message told me they were speaking frequently. At 6:20. We need to handle this before lawyers make it worse. At 7. I know I hurt you. I'm trying to save the company and protect everyone who works here. At 7:15. Dad would have understood. That was the message that almost made me answer. Thomas had been dead for 8 years. Daniel invoked him whenever he needed forgiveness from someone who could no longer contradict him. I typed a reply. Then deleted it. Silence was not punishment. It was evidence collection. Every unanswered message pushed Daniel toward honesty or panic. Both were useful. At 8:42, he sent one final text. Martin says if you challenge the house, he will call the loan. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Ruth and Arthur. Martin had finally connected the property directly to the financing. Not in a contract. Not yet. But in Daniel's own words. Ruth entered the office carrying 2 bowls of soup. Does that change your plan? It confirms it. She placed 1 bowl beside me. Your son is asking for help. My son is asking me to remain quiet so the man who stole my house will continue financing him. He may not understand the full arrangement. That does not make him innocent. No. Ruth sat across from me. But it may make him frightened. I picked up the spoon but did not eat. When Daniel was 9, he climbed onto the garage roof because a ball was stuck in the gutter. Thomas told him to wait for a ladder. Daniel climbed anyway. What happened? He slipped. Ruth's eyes widened. I caught him. You caught a 9-year-old falling from a roof? I injured my shoulder. He could have killed you. He cried for an hour because he thought I was angry. Were you? No. I was terrified. I looked at Daniel's message again. For years, whenever he made a dangerous decision, I remembered the boy falling toward me. I kept trying to catch him before he hit the ground. And now? Now I'm wondering whether catching him every time is the reason he keeps climbing. The following morning, I returned to Northline. Not through the lobby. I entered the coffee shop across the street at 8:15 and took a table near the window. Employees arrived in groups. Most carried laptops and paper cups. Some looked tired. Several stopped outside the building to finish private phone calls before entering. A company's mood is visible before its financial statements are. Confident employees walk directly to the door. Frightened employees pause. At 8:40, a woman in a gray coat exited Northline and crossed the street. I recognized her from Daniel's company website. Nina Patel. Chief Operating Officer. The website still listed her as part of the executive team, but she carried a cardboard box. She entered the coffee shop and ordered tea. When the barista asked whether she wanted her usual, Nina said, "Not anymore." She sat 2 tables away. I waited until she opened her laptop. Then I approached. "Nina?" She looked up. "Yes?" "I'm Eleanor Hart." Recognition moved across her face. Daniel must have shown my photograph. Or perhaps everyone at Northline knew the woman whose property had been used to keep them employed. "I know who you are," she said. "May I sit down?" She glanced toward the office building. "I don't think that would be appropriate." "Did you resign?" Her hand tightened around the teacup. "My employment is confidential." "I understand." I remained standing. "Did Daniel tell you my house was sold without my permission?" Nina looked toward the window. "Mrs. Hart." "Eleanor." "I should go." She began packing her laptop. I lowered my voice. "Your chief financial officer resigned 3 weeks ago. 2 contractors are unpaid. Payroll is due tomorrow, and Meridian can seize voting control after default." Her movement stopped. "You should not know that. That is rarely the same as saying I'm wrong." She looked at me for several seconds. Then she slowly closed the laptop. "Sit down." I took the chair opposite her. Nina leaned forward. "If Daniel finds out I spoke to you, he'll accuse me of violating my agreement. Then do not tell me anything covered by it. What else is there? Tell me what frightened you." She studied my face. "People often reveal more when you do not rush to fill the silence." Nina finally spoke. "The company stopped behaving like a development firm 6 months ago." "How?" "Daniel began approving deals without review. Short-term loans. Consultant payments. Property options through related companies. Related to whom? I couldn't establish that. Martin Vale? Her reaction was immediate. She knew the name. He began attending private meetings, she said. In what role? Daniel called him an advisor. Was he paid? I never saw an agreement. Did he influence financing? Yes. Nina looked down at her tea. The first time Martin came into the office, he already knew which lenders had refused us. He knew our cash position. He knew the South Harbor tenant was preparing to withdraw. Information Daniel gave him? I assumed so. But our lender received internal forecasts before the board did. That changed the room. Who prepared those forecasts? The finance team. Who had access? Daniel. The CFO. Myself. 2 analysts. And Martin? He should not have. I leaned back. Why did the CFO resign? Nina's expression closed. That is covered by my agreement. Then tell me whether he left willingly. Her silence answered. A delivery truck stopped outside Northline. 2 men began unloading office chairs. New furniture for a company that could not meet payroll. Appearance to the end. What was in the consultant payments? I asked. Nina looked at me sharply. You've seen the accounts? No. Then how do you know? I didn't. But you just confirmed they matter. She sat back, almost smiling despite herself. I understand why Daniel never wanted you involved. Daniel wanted me involved when he needed the original investment. Her smile disappeared. There were recurring payments to a company called Shoreline Advisory. How much? I can't say. Did they provide services? Not that I could identify. Address? A virtual office. Owner? Another company. Connected to Martin? I don't know. I wrote the name on a napkin. Why did you resign? Nina looked through the glass toward Northline. My team prepared a cash forecast showing we could not meet both payroll and the lender payment. Daniel ordered me to revise the assumptions. To show what? That a permit fee would be refunded this week. Will it? No. How large is the supposed refund? Enough to close the gap on payroll. So employees believe they will be paid. Yes. And when they aren't? Daniel says new financing will arrive. From Martin? He won't say. I folded the napkin. Did Daniel sell my house before or after the forecast was changed? After. The betrayal deepened. He had not acted during one moment of panic. He had acted after senior staff warned him the numbers did not work. Do you have copies of the original forecast? I asked. Nina's face hardened. I cannot give you company documents. I'm not asking you to. You are. I'm asking whether the records still exist. She hesitated. The system keeps version histories. Can Daniel delete them? Not easily. Can Martin? He shouldn't have access. That word again. Shouldn't. It is one of the most dangerous words in business. It describes every unlocked door moments before someone walks through it. I stood. Thank you. Nina looked unsettled. For what? For resigning before they could ask you to sign something you would regret. I placed cash beside my untouched coffee. As I turned away, she called my name. Eleanor. I looked back. Daniel isn't evil. No, I said. That would be easier. He really believes he's protecting the company. People can cause extraordinary damage while believing they are the hero. Her eyes lowered. I think Martin wants the South Harbor land. So do I. No. I mean all of it. She leaned closer. Northline owns only the central development site. But Daniel has options to purchase 4 neighboring parcels once the final permits are issued. And if Meridian takes control? It gets the options. The real prize was no longer hidden. Northline's existing company might fail. But its future rights were worth far more than its current balance sheet. Martin had financed Daniel's survival not because he believed in him, but because he needed Daniel to keep the options alive until he could seize them. My house had been a payment. A trophy. And perhaps a test of how far Daniel was willing to go. Arthur confirmed the rest by late afternoon. Meridian Bridge Capital was owned through 3 layers of companies. The final controlling trust had been established by a law firm representing Martin Vale. Shoreline Advisory shared an accountant with another company owned by Martin's nephew. Over 8 months, Northline had paid Shoreline nearly $700,000 in consulting fees. There was no public evidence of actual services. And the property? I asked. Arthur sent me a map. Martin-controlled companies had quietly purchased 11 buildings surrounding the South Harbor development. Individually, they were worth little. Together with Northline's central site and purchase options, they formed an uninterrupted stretch of waterfront. Once rezoned, the combined land could support hotels, luxury residences, and a private marina. Estimated future value: more than $180 million. I stared at the number. Daniel thought he was saving a development company. Martin was assembling a district. He needs Northline to default, I said. Eventually, Arthur replied. But only after the final municipal vote. When is that? Next month. So why call the loan Friday? He may not. What do you mean? The default gives Meridian the right to take control. It doesn't require immediate enforcement. He can keep Daniel in place. Exactly. Your son remains the public face while Martin gains legal leverage behind him. And after the permits? He removes Daniel. The plan was elegant because Daniel would help execute it. He would continue attending council meetings, reassuring employees, convincing vendors to wait, using his name, his reputation, and my stolen property to support a company that no longer belonged to him. Then, once Martin had everything he needed, Daniel would be discarded. I should have felt satisfaction. He had betrayed me and was now being betrayed himself. But revenge rarely arrives cleanly. What I felt was grief. Daniel had become so desperate to look successful that he could no longer recognize when someone else was using his ambition against him. Can Northline be saved? I asked. Arthur hesitated. The operations? Yes. Possibly. The current ownership? That depends on what you mean by saved. I stood and walked to the window. Across Ruth's courtyard, a boy was teaching his younger sister to ride a bicycle. He held the back of the seat until she found her balance. Then he released it without telling her. She continued for several yards before realizing she was alone. Could another investor acquire the Meridian debt? I asked. Arthur was silent. You're considering a rescue? I'm considering control. That is different. Yes. Martin will not voluntarily sell if the South Harbor rights are as valuable as they appear. He may if he believes Northline will fail before the permits. You want to make the debt look riskier. I want to understand its real value before deciding anything. Arthur sighed. I recognize that tone. What tone? The one that used to cost people their corner offices. Find out whether Meridian has co-investors. You think Martin borrowed to fund the loan? Men like Martin prefer using other people's money. Oh, look. And Arthur? Yes? Do not use my name. He went quiet again. What name should I use? None yet. That evening, Daniel appeared at Ruth's apartment. We heard him before he knocked. His footsteps climbed quickly, stopped outside the door, then moved away before returning. Ruth looked through the peephole. He looks awful. Good. You don't mean that. No. She opened the door. Daniel stood in the hallway holding a bouquet of white lilies. They were the flowers people send when they do not know whether they are apologizing or mourning. Mom. His eyes moved from Ruth to me. You wouldn't answer. I received your messages. Can I come in? Ruth looked at me. I nodded. Daniel entered and placed the flowers on a small table. He looked around as though surprised I could exist comfortably in a room he had not provided. I went to the hotel, he said. I checked out. I know. They refunded the company. Did that help? His face tightened. So you know about the cash problem. I know you cannot cover payroll and Friday's payment. He stared at me. Who told you? That is the wrong question. Was it Nina? Ruth closed the front door. Daniel, she said, you should be careful about asking questions that may sound like witness intimidation later. He turned toward her. Witness? Yes. His face changed. For the first time, the possibility of legal consequences became real to him. He looked back at me. You brought Ruth into this? You brought Ruth into this when you forged my initials. I did not forge them. Who did? I don't know. That is not believable. Pike handled the documents. Did you tell him I had agreed to sell? Daniel lowered his voice. I told him you had discussed downsizing. That was not my question. He walked toward the window, then turned back. Martin said the authorization needed to be broader for the financing. And you agreed? I signed what Pike gave me. Did you read it? His silence was answer enough. You signed a property transfer involving my home without reading the documents? I trusted the attorney. No. You trusted the outcome. Daniel's breathing became uneven. I needed the loan. You needed to believe you were still in control. I employ 83 people. And therefore my rights became optional? I was going to fix it. You sold the piano. His face collapsed slightly. I didn't know they auctioned it. You chose the storage unit. My assistant arranged it. You instructed her to choose the cheapest option. He stared at me. I had guessed. His expression confirmed it. I was trying to reduce expenses, he said. By selling my life one object at a time. I can find the piano. It has already been found. His eyes moved toward the cedar chest beside the wall. He recognized it. How did you get that back? I purchased it. You shouldn't have had to. No. The word remained between us. Daniel sat down. The energy seemed to leave his body all at once. I don't know what to do. It was the first honest thing he had said. I sat opposite him. Tell me everything. He looked at Ruth. She stays. He rubbed his palms against his trousers. Martin approached me 8 months ago. How? At a charity dinner. Did you invite him? No. He came to my table. What did he offer? Contacts. Investors. Help with the council. Did he ask about me? Daniel hesitated. Yes. What did he ask? If you still owned the house. Ruth and I exchanged a glance. Martin's interest in the property had begun before the emergency loan. What did you say? I asked. I said you planned to retire there. And? He laughed. Something cold moved through me. Why? He said you always liked pretending you were better than the people you came from. I remained still. Daniel looked ashamed. I told him that wasn't true. But you continued doing business with him. I needed his connections. There are moments when love does not disappear. It changes temperature. I still loved my son. But the love had become something I could no longer safely touch. When did he mention buying the house? After the tenant withdrew from South Harbor. He connected the loan to the property? He said he wanted security that mattered to me. To you? Daniel looked down. He knew the company was everything to me. No. He knew the house mattered to me. I didn't understand that at first. When did you understand? Before the sale. His answer was barely audible. There it was. The final excuse falling away. He knew. Not every detail. Not the full scheme. But enough. Why did you still do it? I asked. His eyes filled. Because I thought losing the company would prove I was nothing. The room became quiet. Outside, someone closed a car door. A dog barked from the building next door. Daniel's voice shook. Dad built things with his hands. You walked into failing companies and saved them. I spent my whole life being introduced as your son. Even when Northline was doing well, people said you funded it. You advised me. You made the introductions. Those things were true. I know. He wiped his face angrily. That was the worst part. Ruth looked away to give him a fragment of privacy. Daniel continued. I wanted one success nobody could trace back to you. So you used my house to preserve it. He closed his eyes. Yes. The admission hurt. But it also ended the uncertainty. People imagine truth brings relief. Sometimes it only gives pain a precise address. Does Martin control Meridian? I asked. Daniel's eyes opened. I don't know. Yes, you do. I suspected. When? Last month. Before you sold the house? He did not answer. I stood and walked toward the kitchen. Not because I needed anything. Because if I remained seated, I might have reached across the table and comforted him. And comfort, in that moment, would have been another form of permission. Is Martin receiving payments through Shoreline Advisory? I asked. Daniel looked startled. How do you know about Shoreline? Answer me. He introduced them as strategic consultants. What did they do? They helped with investors. Which investors? I don't know. How much have you paid them? Approximately 600,000. 700. His face changed. You've seen our accounts. Not yet. That frightened him more than if I had. What does that mean? It means the truth is visible even from outside. He stood. Mom, if you expose this now, Martin will take everything. He already has. No. The council vote is next month. If we reach it, the development survives. And who owns it afterward? We renegotiate. With what leverage? He had no answer. You believe Martin will allow you to keep control after spending months positioning himself to take it? He needs me. Until the vote. Daniel stared at the floor. Some truths do not need explanation once spoken aloud. You knew, I said. I hoped I was wrong. That is not the same as not knowing. He moved closer. Help me. The words were quiet. Childlike. Dangerous. Help you do what? Save Northline. Why? Because people will lose their jobs. That is one reason. The investors trusted me. Another. He looked at me. And because it is mine. No, Daniel. I spoke gently. That is the first truth you must accept. It isn't yours anymore. He shook his head. I still own the majority shares. On paper. Meridian controls your debt, your voting rights after default, and likely the entities draining cash through consulting payments. How do you know all this? Because unlike you, I stopped asking Martin to rescue me. His expression hardened. You think you can beat him? I think Martin is relying on everyone behaving predictably. What does that mean? He expects you to panic. He expects me to sue. He expects the company to miss its payment. And what are you going to do? I looked at Ruth. She was watching me carefully. The question had returned. What are you going to do? This time, I had an answer. But Daniel had not earned it. I'm going to ask you for 3 things, I said. What? Do not sign any new financing agreement. Do not delete a single company record. And do not tell Martin you spoke to me tonight. Daniel stared. You want me to lie to him? I want you to stop volunteering information to the man dismantling your life. What happens if I do those things? I decide whether there is anything worth saving. You mean the company? I mean you. His face tightened. Then he looked away. After Daniel left, Ruth stood beside the window until his car disappeared. Do you believe him? She asked. I believe he is frightened. That was not my question. I believe he did not design Martin's scheme. But he participated. Yes. And you are still considering helping him. I am considering helping the employees. Eleanor. And preserving evidence. Eleanor. I looked at her. She folded her arms. You are planning something. I am gathering options. That phrase has ruined many weekends. I returned to the office and opened the files Arthur had sent. Meridian's loan documents. Northline's property interests. The timeline of shoreline payments. The corporate entities around Martin's holdings. A failing company is rarely one thing. It is debts, contracts, personalities, deadlines, and fear arranged into a structure. Change one pressure point, and the entire shape shifts. At 10:30, Arthur called again. I found Meridian's co-investor. Who? Hawthorne Pension Trust. They funded nearly 60% of the debt facility. Do they know Martin controls the lending entity? They know he manages it. I doubt they know about Shoreline's consulting fees. Would they sell their participation? If they believe the loan is impaired. At what discount? Possibly 20 to 30%. And Martin's portion? He may sell if the pension trust exits and he thinks Northline will collapse before the municipal vote. I studied the calendar. Thursday payroll. Friday debt payment. 4 weeks until the vote. How quickly could an acquisition close? With cash and the right legal team? Several days. Through a new entity? Arthur became silent. Then he understood. You want to buy the debt. I want the right to examine the books. Debt ownership would give you audit rights. And conversion rights after default. You would effectively control Northline. Only if they fail to pay. They will fail. Then the decision will be theirs. Arthur gave a low laugh without humor. You always did make consequences sound administrative. Can it be done? Yes. Without my name appearing? We can form an acquisition company with nominee management until closing. Call it Aldercrest Capital. Why? Thomas planted an alder tree beside our first apartment. Arthur did not ask anything else. I'll begin tonight. One more thing. What? Approach Hawthorne first. Tell them the borrower's internal controls may be compromised. That will frighten them. It should. And Martin? Let him hear that an institutional buyer is evaluating the loan. You want him curious. I want him greedy. At 11:50, I turned off the desk lamp. Ruth had already gone to bed. The apartment was silent except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. My phone lit up. A message from Daniel. I won't sign anything. A second message followed. Martin wants to meet me tomorrow morning. Then a third. He says he has a new solution for payroll. I called Daniel immediately. He answered in a whisper. I thought you weren't going to call. What solution? I don't know yet. Where is the meeting? At the house. My house. Of course. Martin understood settings. He chose rooms the way other people chose weapons. What time? 9. Do not agree to anything. What should I say? Say you need 24 hours for legal review. He'll refuse. Then you refuse. You don't understand how he talks when. I understand Martin better than you ever will. Daniel became quiet. Are you going to be there? No. That was true. Not inside. After ending the call, I contacted Ruth. She appeared in the hallway wearing slippers and holding a lamp as if prepared to use it for self-defense. What happened? Martin is offering new financing tomorrow. Then Daniel should not attend alone. He won't. You just told him you wouldn't be there. I won't. Ruth stared at me. Sometimes I remember why opposing counsel hated you. At 8:45 the next morning, I sat inside a parked car across from my former home. Rainwater still shone on the road. The ocean beyond the cliffs was hidden beneath a layer of white fog. Ruth sat beside me with a thermos of coffee. Arthur had arranged for a local investigator to park farther down the street and record the vehicles arriving. At 8:52, Daniel pulled into the driveway. At 8:57, Graham Pike arrived in a black sedan. The attorney. At 9:03, a silver SUV stopped near the front steps. Martin emerged, followed by a woman I did not recognize. She carried a leather document case. Who is she? Ruth asked. I photographed her through the windshield and sent the image to Arthur. 2 minutes later, he replied. Vivian Cole. Restructuring officer for Meridian Bridge Capital. Martin had brought the lender's representative. The meeting was not about helping Daniel make payroll. It was about formalizing control. At 9:15, another car arrived. The driver remained inside for several seconds before stepping out. Nina Patel. Ruth turned toward me. Did you invite her? No. Nina carried no box this time. Only a folder. She walked to the front door, stopped, and looked directly across the street. For one brief second, I thought she saw me. Then she entered. My phone vibrated. A message from Daniel. They want me to sign over temporary voting control. Another message came before I could respond. Martin says it is only until the council vote. I typed. Do not sign. Ask for the full financial disclosures behind Meridian and Shoreline. 3 minutes passed. Then, Pike says that is irrelevant. I replied. Ask why Shoreline received $700,000 while Northline could not pay contractors. The curtains in the front sitting room shifted. Inside the house, someone moved quickly. Daniel sent no response. 5 minutes later, the front door opened. Nina stepped outside. She descended the porch stairs and walked directly toward our car. Ruth unlocked the door. Nina climbed into the back seat, breathing rapidly. What happened? I asked. She held out the folder. Daniel asked about Shoreline. And? Martin blamed me for leaking confidential records. Did you? No. What is in the folder? Something the former CFO gave me before he left. She placed it on the center console. He said not to use it unless Martin tried to seize the company. Ruth opened the folder. Inside were copies of bank transfers, emails, and handwritten meeting notes. One email was from Martin to Graham Pike. The subject line read, Hart Property Leverage. The message was brief. Once Daniel commits the house, he cannot retreat without exposing himself. Proceed with the expanded authority. Keep Eleanor outside the transaction until registration is complete. For several seconds, nobody spoke. There it was. Not suspicion. Not inference. A written plan. Martin had known the authority was being expanded. He had instructed the attorney to keep me unaware. Ruth's voice was controlled. This proves conspiracy. Nina pointed to another page. That isn't the worst one. The second email discussed Shoreline's consulting payments. A portion of each payment had been transferred into a private account connected to Graham Pike. Another portion went to a company controlled by Martin. Northline's emergency financing had been circling back to the people who arranged it. They were lending Daniel money, then extracting it through false fees, making default inevitable. Ruth looked at me. We go to the authorities now. Soon. Eleanor. A movement near the house interrupted her. Daniel came through the front door. Martin followed. Even from across the street, I could see they were arguing. Daniel turned back toward the house. Martin grabbed his arm. My body moved before my thoughts did. I opened the car door. Ruth caught my sleeve. Wait. Martin released Daniel almost immediately. The gesture had not been violent, but it had been revealing. Daniel stepped backward. Then Pike appeared in the doorway holding the documents. Daniel looked across the street. This time, he saw me. His face changed. Martin followed his gaze. For the first time since my return, the smile disappeared completely from his face. He knew. Not what I had found. Not yet. But he knew I was no longer reacting blindly. I stepped out of the car. Fog moved across the road between us. Martin stood on my porch. Daniel stood below him. And I stood beside a vehicle containing enough evidence to threaten everything Martin had built. None of us spoke. We did not need to. The balance had shifted. Only slightly. But Martin felt it. He entered the house and slammed the door. Daniel crossed the street. What are you doing here? He asked. Did you sign? No. His voice shook. He said he would call the loan today. He was always going to. He knows about Shoreline. He created Shoreline. Daniel looked toward Nina in the back seat. What did you give her? Nina opened the door and stepped out. The truth, she said. Daniel's face drained as he looked through the folder. He read the email about my house. Then the payment records. Then Pike's private transfers. His hands began trembling. I didn't know. I believed him. This time, I believed him. But ignorance did not erase participation. It only changed the sentence that came after it. What happens now? He asked. Sirens were not approaching. No cameras waited. There was no public victory. Only 5 tired people standing on a wet road while a gull cried somewhere above the fog. Now, I said, you go back to your office. He stared at me. Why? You pay your employees whatever cash remains. That won't cover everyone. Then executives wait. What about Meridian? Do nothing. They'll take control. Yes. His face twisted with disbelief. You want Martin to take the company? I want him to believe he has. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then his eyes narrowed. What have you done? I glanced toward the house. Behind an upstairs curtain, Martin was watching us. Nothing yet, I said. That was almost true. At 11:30 that morning, Hawthorne Pension Trust accepted an offer to sell its share of Northline's debt. By sunset, Aldercrest Capital owned 60% of Meridian's lending position. And Martin Vale had no idea the woman he had locked out of her own home had just purchased the first key to his company. By Friday morning, Aldercrest Capital existed in 3 places. On incorporation documents. Inside Arthur's private investment office. And in the minds of several frightened lenders who believed an aggressive institutional buyer had begun circling Northline. My name appeared nowhere. Arthur served as interim chairman. A retired banking executive named Miriam Cho was listed as the authorized representative. The address belonged to a commercial office suite in Boston. From the outside, Aldercrest looked like what Martin respected most. Money without a face. At 8:30, Northline's employees received only 70% of their salaries. Executives received nothing. Daniel stood in the middle of the main office and delivered the news himself. Nina told me about it afterward. He did not blame a delayed transfer. He did not mention the imaginary permit refund. For once, he did not promise a miracle. He told them the company had a liquidity crisis, that he had failed to disclose its severity, and that anyone who wished to leave would receive references without retaliation. Some employees shouted. One woman cried. 2 senior managers walked out before he finished. But most remained. Not because they trusted Daniel. Because mortgages, school fees, and medical bills do not disappear when an employer disappoints you. At 9:15, Northline missed its payment to Meridian. Martin expected to control the response. Instead, Miriam Cho sent the notice. Aldercrest, as majority participant in the lending facility, was exercising its right to demand an immediate independent audit. The notice required Northline to preserve every email, invoice, expense report, board minute, consultant agreement, and financing document created during the previous 24 months. It suspended new payments to related parties. It prohibited any sale or transfer of company property without lender approval. And it required all executives to disclose personal or professional relationships with Meridian, Shoreline Advisory, Graham Pike, and Martin Vale. Daniel received the notice at 9:17. Martin called him at 9:19. He called Meridian's administrator at 9:21. At 9:23, he called Arthur's office and demanded to speak with Aldercrest's owner. He was told the owner did not communicate directly with borrowers or minority lending partners. That answer disturbed him. Martin understood people. He knew how to flatter them, embarrass them, provoke them, or make them feel temporarily important. But he could not manipulate an institution whose face he had never seen. At 9:40, he drove to Northline. Nina called me from an empty stairwell. He's here. What is Daniel doing? Trying not to panic. And Martin? Not trying. Through the phone, I heard a door slam. Then Martin's voice echoed faintly through the office. He says the audit is invalid, Nina whispered. It isn't. He says Hawthorne had no right to sell without offering him the participation first. The agreement contained no such restriction. You've read it? Several times. Nina lowered her voice further. Daniel wants to know whether he should meet with Martin. Yes. Alone? No. You and the company's independent counsel should attend. Pike says he is independent counsel. Graham Pike should not enter the building. That was not only my preference. Ruth had submitted a formal litigation preservation notice to Pike that morning. He had been informed that his communications concerning my property, Northline, Meridian, and Shoreline were subject to pending civil claims. The notice did not accuse him of a crime. It did something more useful. It told him we had evidence. At 10:11, Martin entered Northline's boardroom. Daniel sat at one end of the table. Nina sat beside him. A newly retained attorney named Helen Foster sat across from them with the audit notice open on her laptop. Martin did not sit. What exactly have you done? He asked Daniel. Daniel glanced toward Nina. Then back at Martin. I missed the payment. You were instructed to sign the temporary control agreement. I wanted legal review. You already had legal review. Pike represented Meridian. He represented the transaction. He received money from Shoreline. Martin's expression did not change immediately. That was one of his gifts. He could hold his face still while deciding which version of reality to present. Who told you that? It doesn't matter. It matters if an employee stole confidential records. Nina leaned forward. The transfers were Northline's records. They were privileged. Helen interrupted calmly. Payments made by the company to a consultant are not automatically privileged. Martin looked at her for the first time. And you are? Northline's independent restructuring counsel. Since when? 8 this morning. He smiled. Not because anything was amusing. Because he needed the room to believe he remained comfortable. You people are behaving as if the company has options, he said. It does not. Helen turned her laptop toward him. Aldercrest has offered emergency debtor-in-possession style financing outside formal bankruptcy, subject to governance changes and audit cooperation. Martin's smile disappeared. Daniel had not known the proposal was coming. Neither had Nina. Arthur and I had decided that surprise was necessary. People reveal their loyalties when no one has prepared them. What governance changes? Daniel asked. Helen opened the attached term sheet. An interim board appointed by the majority lender. Suspension of related party contracts. Replacement of the chief executive pending audit results. Conversion of a portion of debt into equity. Additional capital to complete payroll and preserve the South Harbor options. Daniel's face became pale. Replacement of the chief executive? Temporarily, Helen said. Martin laughed once. There is nothing temporary about a creditor takeover. He looked at Daniel. This is what your mother has done. Daniel stiffened. My mother? Martin realized the error as soon as he spoke. No one in the room had connected me to Alder Crest. Helen noticed. Nina noticed. Daniel noticed most of all. How do you know Mom is involved? He asked. Martin placed both hands on the table. Who else would attack the company days after threatening the house sale? She didn't threaten you. She has spent her career destroying businesses under the pretense of saving them. That sentence told me something when Nina repeated it later. Martin had followed my career. Not casually. He knew what I had done after high school. He knew the companies I had restructured. He knew how I worked. His purchase of my home was not merely connected to an old grudge. He had been measuring himself against me for decades. Daniel stood. You told me she was irrelevant. She is retired. You just said she is taking the company. I said she is trying. Helen closed the term sheet. Mr. Vale, you are not an officer of Northline. Unless you are prepared to disclose your relationship with Meridian and Shoreline, this meeting is over. I arranged the financing keeping this company alive. You also appear to have benefited from payments made using that financing. That is a defamatory accusation. It was not an accusation. It was an invitation to explain. Martin looked around the table. Nobody lowered their eyes. That was new for him. People like Martin do not require everyone to obey. They require one person in every room to appear afraid. When no one does, their authority begins to look theatrical. He turned toward Daniel. If you accept this proposal, you will never control your company again. Daniel looked down at the term sheet. For 12 years, he had introduced Northline as if it were a second name. Daniel Hart, founder and chief executive. Daniel Hart, visionary developer. Daniel Hart, the man who had built something nobody could attribute to his parents. The proposal would remove all of that in one signature. But for the first time, the people working for him would be paid in full. The contractors would receive partial payments. The development rights would remain alive. And an independent audit would determine where the money had gone. What happens if I reject it? Daniel asked. Helen answered. Alder Crest accelerates the loan. Northline files for protection or enters receivership. Employees may be dismissed. Property options may expire. Martin stepped closer. I can prevent that. Daniel looked at him. How? Sign the agreement I brought yesterday. And give Meridian voting control. Temporarily. Until the council vote? Yes. And after? We renegotiate. Daniel's face changed. Those were the same words he had used with me. Now he heard how empty they sounded from someone else. Martin lowered his voice. I believed in you when no one else would. Daniel almost smiled. My mother gave me the original money. That is exactly why you need to choose for yourself now. The manipulation was so familiar that I could picture it without being present. Martin had always offered rebellion as proof of independence. At 17, he convinced boys to humiliate weaker classmates by telling them only cowards followed school rules. At 64, he was using the same method on my son. Do what serves me. And call it freedom. Daniel picked up the emergency financing proposal. What is the deadline? 2 o'clock, Helen said. Martin reached for the pages. Daniel pulled them away. Leave. The room became silent. Martin stared at him. What did you say? This is a Northline board meeting. You aren't an officer, director, or disclosed lender representative. You would have no company without me. Daniel's voice remained uneven, but he did not look away. I may have no company because of you. Martin leaned across the table. You lost this company because you were too weak to run it. Daniel flinched. Then Nina spoke. No. He lost control because people around him profited from keeping him frightened. Martin turned toward her. You should be very careful. Helen stood. And you should leave. For several seconds, I imagine he considered refusing. Then he straightened his jacket. 2:00, he said to Daniel. After that, I cannot protect you. He walked out. At 1:53, Daniel signed Aldercrest's proposal. He surrendered his position as chief executive. He agreed to cooperate with the audit. And he accepted that any false statement would terminate his remaining employment and expose him to personal claims. 7 minutes later, Aldercrest transferred $4 million into a protected Northline account. Payroll was completed. The most urgent contractors were paid. And for the first time in months, money entered the company without Martin taking part of it back. The audit began Monday morning. A team of forensic accountants occupied Northline's largest conference room. Hard drives were copied. Access logs were preserved. Personal devices used for company business were identified. Every payment to Shoreline Advisory was frozen. Every contract prepared by Graham Pike was flagged. Every transaction involving Meridian was assigned a timeline. I did not enter the office. Not yet. Aldercrest communicated through Miriam and Arthur. I listened to daily briefings from Ruth's apartment while sitting beside the cedar chest that had once held my family's history. The contrast was not lost on me. My son had placed my past in a warehouse to save his company. Now the documents hidden inside that past were helping me take control of it. But control did not feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. Northline still employed 83 people. Its suppliers had their own employees. Its developments affected tenants, council decisions, and neighborhoods. A revenge fantasy can destroy a company in one satisfying gesture. Real life leaves innocent people beneath the falling pieces. I had no intention of giving Martin that kind of collateral damage. On the third day of the audit, the forensic team discovered that Shoreline had submitted invoices for community consultation services that never occurred. The invoices named public meetings canceled months earlier. Several included photographs downloaded from unrelated municipal events. Another billed Northline for a transportation impact study written by a legitimate engineering company. Shoreline had changed the cover page and charged 6 times the original cost. The payments had been approved by Daniel. But the supporting documents had been uploaded after his approval using credentials assigned to Graham Pike's office. Daniel had signed without verifying the work. Careless. Negligent. Possibly a violation of his duties. But he had not created the false documents. That distinction mattered legally. Emotionally, it changed less. A person who repeatedly refuses to look can become useful to people who need darkness. On Thursday, Ruth received a response from Martin's attorneys concerning the house. They denied wrongdoing. They claimed Martin had purchased the property in good faith. They argued that any irregularity in the power of attorney was solely between Daniel, Pike, and me. They offered to sell the house back. For $1,300,000. Nearly $400,000 more than Martin had paid. Ruth placed the letter on the kitchen table. He wants you to purchase your own house from him at a profit. He wants to turn retreat into a business transaction. We can seek an injunction. Do it. You know this may take months. I do. And the house may remain unavailable during the case. I looked at the photograph of Thomas still resting beside Ruth's telephone. I waited 30 years to build it. I can wait longer to reclaim it properly. Ruth studied me. You could afford the settlement. That is not the point. No. She folded the letter. But I needed to hear you say it. Money can restore access. It cannot restore truth. Had I paid Martin's price, he would have told himself he had sold the house twice. Once through fraud. Once through my exhaustion. I would not finance his version of events. Daniel worked from a temporary desk in the accounting department. His title was listed as founder and development advisor. He no longer had authority to approve payments, hire employees, or negotiate financing. Every morning, he arrived before 8. Every evening, he left after the audit team. At first, I assumed he was trying to prove himself indispensable. Then Nina called me. He's reviewing vendor files. Has anyone asked him to? No. Why? He found contractors who were promised payment dates that no one recorded properly. Is he changing anything? He doesn't have authority. Good. He is preparing summaries for the restructuring team. I remained quiet. Nina understood the reason. You don't have to forgive him because he is finally working responsibly, she said. I know. But you are allowed to notice. I know that too. Daniel had spent years confusing praise with love. Perhaps I had sometimes done the same in reverse. When he succeeded, I told him I was proud. When he struggled, I solved problems. I had rarely asked who he believed he was when neither success nor rescue was available. Now he was sitting at a temporary desk with no title worth displaying. For the first time, he had to decide whether the work mattered when the applause did not. A week after the audit began, Arthur found the transaction that altered everything. Shoreline had not kept all the money it extracted from Northline. $180,000 had been transferred into a property company that later purchased an option over land beside my home. The parcel included access to the cliff road. If combined with my property and 2 neighboring lots already controlled by Martin, the land could be redeveloped into a luxury coastal resort. My house was not only a trophy. It was part of another assembly. Was Daniel aware of this? I asked. There is no evidence he knew, Arthur said. Did the sale documents mention development? No. Planning applications? Not yet. But Martin's architect prepared preliminary drawings. Arthur sent them. The images appeared on my screen. My home was gone. In its place stood a glass hotel overlooking the ocean. The rose garden had become a parking entrance. The balcony Thomas built had been replaced by a restaurant terrace. For a moment, anger rose so quickly that my vision blurred. Martin had mocked my memories while already planning their demolition. Ruth stood behind me. We file for an immediate preservation order today. Yes. And we inform the council. Yes. Eleanor. I looked at her. Do not let this part become personal enough to make you careless. It became personal when he entered my home. No. That made it painful. She pointed toward the screen. This makes you dangerous. Ruth was right. Pain can sharpen judgment. Rage can convince judgment it is no longer necessary. I closed the architectural file. We disclose everything through council. No anonymous leak? No. No quiet pressure on the planning department? No. She nodded. Good. I almost smiled. You sound disappointed. I had bail money prepared. The preservation order was granted 2 days later. Martin could not demolish, alter, mortgage, or transfer the house until the ownership dispute was resolved. The court did not return the property to me, but it prevented him from destroying it. That evening, I drove past the house alone. The sky was clear. Warm light glowed behind the windows. Martin's car was parked outside. For one terrible second, I imagined walking up the path. I imagined entering with the court order in my hand. I imagined telling him that every room still knew my name. But justice is not strengthened by beautiful speeches delivered too early. So I remained inside the car. A shadow moved behind the upstairs curtain. Then the porch light switched off. He knew I was there. I drove away. Martin responded to the court order by becoming generous. At least publicly. He donated to a coastal preservation charity. He attended a hospital fundraiser. He appeared beside the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony and spoke about responsible stewardship of historic communities. A local business magazine published a profile calling him a patient investor guiding Northline through temporary instability. The article described Alder Crest as an opportunistic out-of-state creditor. My name was not mentioned. That was intentional. Martin believed Alder Crest might be pressured by public criticism. Arthur suggested releasing a statement. I refused. Let him talk, I said. He is shaping the public story. Stories become liabilities when documents contradict them. You always hated public relations. I hate arguments that depend on adjectives. Arthur sighed. The board wants to know when you'll reveal your ownership. When it helps the company. And when will that be? Martin is organizing the Northline Gala, isn't he? He has offered your house as the venue. I leaned back. The annual South Harbor Development Gala had originally been planned at a hotel. Martin had moved it to my home, presenting the property as an example of restored coastal elegance. Council members would attend. Investors. Journalists. Northline employees. The event was scheduled for the night before the municipal committee issued its final recommendation. Martin intended to stand inside my house and present himself as Northline's rescuer. He needed the public to believe he controlled the company before Alder Crest could reveal otherwise. Accept the venue, I said. Arthur became silent. You want the gala to proceed? Yes. At your house? Yes. Ruth is going to object. Ruth objects professionally. What are you planning? An introduction. The audit report was completed 3 days before the gala. It contained 214 pages. The findings were precise. Northline had paid Shoreline Advisory $712,000 for inadequately documented or non-existent services. Graham Pike's firm had received undisclosed compensation from entities connected to Meridian. Martin-controlled companies had benefited from transactions that were not presented to Northline's board. Internal projections had been manipulated. Financing documents had been structured to create control rights following a predictable default. And the expanded power of attorney used to sell my home had been inserted after my original execution date. The metadata showed the page had been created on a computer registered to Pike's office. My initials had been copied from another document. Daniel had signed the property transfer authorization and sale documents. He had failed to verify my consent. He had approved related party payments without adequate review. He had concealed Northline's financial condition from employees and investors. But the audit found no evidence that he received money personally from the house sale or Shoreline payments. Martin had used Daniel's pride. Daniel had used my trust. One betrayal did not erase the other. They simply belonged to different levels of intention. The interim board met that afternoon. I attended by video with my camera off. Miriam chaired the meeting. Arthur presented the audit findings. Helen explained the legal exposure. Daniel sat at the far end of the conference table. He looked thinner. His hair had begun to gray near the temples in a way I had not noticed before. The board considered 3 questions. Could Northline survive? Should Daniel remain employed? And should the company refer the audit findings to law enforcement? The first answer was yes. With Aldercrest's capital, revised management, and cancellation of related party contracts, Northline could stabilize. The South Harbor project remained viable if redesigned to reduce debt and include more affordable housing. The second answer was more complicated. Several directors wanted Daniel dismissed immediately. Nina argued that he possessed essential relationships with contractors and municipal staff, but should hold no executive authority. Miriam asked for my opinion. The room did not know I was listening. I unmuted myself. Daniel should be removed from all management positions. He looked toward the speaker. He recognized my voice. Nobody else spoke. He may remain available during the transition, I continued, subject to council's recommendation and full cooperation. But a founder's emotional attachment to a company does not qualify him to lead it. Daniel's face became still. Miriam asked, should he retain any long-term role? Not while the audit-related claims remain unresolved. Thank you, she said. I muted myself again. That was the closest I came to firing my son before the gala. It did not feel satisfying. I remembered teaching him how to tie his shoes. Helping him prepare for his first job interview. Sitting beside him at the hospital when his daughter was born prematurely. Love does not leave the room when accountability enters. It simply has to stop controlling the vote. The board unanimously removed Daniel from employment effective after the gala. He had been asked to attend only to assist with the transition announcement. He did not know I would be there. Martin did not know who Aldercrest's owner was. The public still believed he had rescued Northline. For 3 more days, we allowed him to enjoy that belief. The evening of the gala, I dressed in Ruth's spare bedroom. I wore a dark navy suit. No jewels except Thomas's wedding ring on a chain beneath my blouse. My hair was shorter than it had been when Martin knew me in school. My face carried more lines. I did not try to hide them. Age had taken certain things from me. It had also taken my need to appear harmless. Ruth stood in the doorway holding 2 pairs of shoes. The black ones are more comfortable, she said. The gray ones look better. You intend to reclaim a company and possibly your home. No one will remember your shoes. I will. She handed me the gray pair. You are impossible. You have known that since 1974. Ruth's expression softened. Thomas would be proud of you. I looked down. No. She frowned. He would be heartbroken that we reached this point. That is not the same as being disappointed in you. No. I fastened the shoe strap. But I think he would ask whether I was doing this to save something or punish someone. What is your answer? Both. Ruth nodded. At least you're honest. The gala began at 7. Cars lined the cliff road. Temporary lights illuminated the garden. A glass canopy had been erected over the terrace. A string quartet played near the rose beds Thomas and I planted. Servers carried champagne through rooms that still legally belonged to someone else. Martin had replaced more of my furniture. But he had restored the grandfather clock to the entryway. It had not been in storage. He had kept it. Perhaps he liked the sound. Perhaps he wanted one object I had loved to witness his triumph. At 7:45, Arthur arrived with Miriam and the interim board. They entered without me. Martin greeted them on the porch. He believed Miriam controlled Aldercrest. He smiled as he shook her hand, but she later told me his palm was damp. Daniel arrived alone. He wore a black suit and no tie. He paused at the bottom of the driveway. The house had once been the safest place he knew. Now security personnel checked his name before allowing him inside. Nina greeted him near the entrance. They spoke briefly. He looked toward the road several times. Looking for me, perhaps? Or fearing I might appear. At 8:15, Martin began his speech. I listened through a live audio connection from a car parked half a mile away. He welcomed council members, investors, and community leaders. He spoke about resilience. He praised Northline's employees. He referred to recent distractions caused by parties unfamiliar with the city's long-term needs. Then he thanked Daniel. Not as founder. As a young man who had shown humility by accepting guidance from more experienced hands. The humiliation was elegant. Martin was publicly reducing Daniel while pretending to honor him. Daniel did not react. That was new. Martin announced that a major governance agreement would be revealed after dinner. He implied that Meridian and Aldercrest had reached terms. They had not. He told the room Northline was entering a stable new era under locally committed leadership. His leadership. At 8:28, Arthur sent me a message. He has presented a fake term sheet to 2 reporters. Martin had created a document implying Aldercrest intended to sell its position to Meridian after the council vote. The document was unsigned. But displayed quickly, surrounded by confident statements, it looked convincing. Arthur asked whether to intervene. I replied. Begin the board presentation. I'm coming in. The driver stopped at the entrance. For a few seconds, I remained in the car. Music drifted from the garden. Through the front windows, I could see silhouettes moving beneath chandeliers I had chosen with Thomas 22 years earlier. My hands were cold. Not from fear of Martin. From the knowledge that Daniel was inside. The next minutes would alter his life publicly. I had tried to avoid unnecessary humiliation. But Martin had placed false information before investors, council members, and journalists. Correcting it privately would allow the lie to spread. Truth had to enter through the same door. I stepped out. The conversations nearest the entrance grew quieter as people recognized me. Some knew me as Daniel's mother. Others recognized me from older business photographs. A security guard moved uncertainly toward me. Miriam appeared behind him. Ms. Hart is with me, she said. The guard stepped aside. I entered my home. Martin stood near the fireplace speaking to a council member. When he saw me, the sentence left his mouth unfinished. The room did not become silent all at once. Silence moved outward. First the people near Martin. Then the people watching them. Then the quartet, whose final note faded beneath the glass canopy. Daniel stood near the dining room entrance. His eyes met mine. He did not look angry. He looked tired. Martin recovered quickly. This is a private event, he said. I removed my coat and handed it to an attendant. That would be an unusual description for a gala attended by reporters. You are not on the guest list. Miriam approached. She is now. Martin looked between us. For the first time, uncertainty entered his face without permission. Arthur walked to the small stage beside the terrace doors. Ladies and gentlemen, the interim board of Northline has an announcement concerning tonight's presentation. Martin moved toward him. This is my house and my event. Ruth stepped through the entrance behind me carrying a slim legal folder. Ownership of the house remains under active dispute, she said. And the preservation order permits my client access for inspection upon notice. I received no notice. You did. Your attorney acknowledged it at 4:14 this afternoon. Martin looked toward Pike. Graham Pike stood near the bar. He had been attempting to leave since I entered. 2 investigators from the State Financial Crimes Unit waited outside. They were not there to arrest anyone that evening. They were there because our attorneys had formally delivered evidence concerning potential fraud and document falsification. Pike knew. Martin did not yet. Arthur tapped the microphone. The document shown tonight suggesting Aldercrest Capital has agreed to surrender its lending position is false. Whispers spread through the room. Martin raised his voice. It is a preliminary proposal. It was never issued by Aldercrest. The terms were communicated verbally. No, they were not. Arthur looked toward me. Any communication of that significance would require approval from Aldercrest's controlling shareholder. Martin followed his gaze. The expression on his face changed slowly. Not surprise at first. Refusal. His mind rejected what his eyes already understood. I walked toward the stage. The room opened around me. Each step sounded louder than it should have against the wooden floor. A floor Thomas and I had refinished ourselves one summer because we could not afford professional restoration. I passed the grandfather clock. Its pendulum moved behind the glass. Steady. Unconcerned. Arthur handed me the microphone. My name is Eleanor Hart, I said. For those who do not know me, I spent 27 years restructuring distressed companies. I looked toward Martin. And I am the controlling shareholder of Aldercrest Capital. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Camera shutters clicked. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Martin laughed. It was too loud and ended too quickly. That is impossible. It was inconvenient, I said. Not impossible. You purchased Hawthorne's debt participation? Aldercrest did. With whose money? Mine. His face hardened. You expect everyone to believe a retired consultant secretly acquired a multimillion-dollar lending position in a matter of days? No. I expect the closing documents to establish it. Miriam stepped forward. Aldercrest's acquisition has been verified by Northline's independent counsel and all relevant facility administrators. Martin looked around the room for someone willing to challenge her. Nobody moved. I continued. Following Northline's default, Aldercrest provided emergency financing, assumed majority lender authority, and received equity conversion rights under the agreement originally structured by Meridian. I paused. In simpler terms, Mr. Vale built a trap designed to take Northline from my son. Martin's jaw tightened. And then you stepped into it? No. I looked toward Daniel. I purchased it. There are moments that sound dramatic when described later. In the room, they feel smaller. A glass placed too quickly on a tray. Someone whispering a name. A reporter opening a notebook. A son looking at his mother as though meeting her for the first time. I did not feel powerful. I felt exposed. For weeks, Aldercrest had allowed me to act through documents, representatives, and strategy. Now every emotion had a face again. Martin stepped closer. You purchased distressed debt using information stolen from Northline. All information used to value the investment came from lawful lender disclosures, public filings, and materials provided through authorized restructuring channels. Nina gave you confidential records. Nina preserved evidence of suspected fraud. Pike moved toward the exit. Ruth nodded to the investigators outside. They entered quietly and asked him to remain available for questions. Martin looked at him. The fear that passed between them lasted less than a second. But the room saw it. I turned toward the screen behind the stage. The first audit slide appeared. Not the full report. Only verified findings cleared by counsel for public disclosure. Undisclosed related party payments. Falsified consulting support. Conflicted legal representation. Manipulated financial projections. The crowd became completely silent. Martin pointed toward the screen. These are allegations. Yes, I said. And they will be tested through the proper legal process. Then you have no right to present them as fact. The payments are facts. The altered documents are facts. Your explanations remain pending. I signaled to Arthur. The next slide showed the email concerning my house. Once Daniel commits the house, he cannot retreat without exposing himself. Proceed with the expanded authority. Keep Eleanor outside the transaction until registration is complete. Martin stared at the screen. He did not deny writing it. Instead, he said, that communication is privileged. Ruth answered from beside the stage. You were not Mr. Pike's client in the property transaction, according to the documents your attorney submitted. You cannot claim both independence and privilege whenever convenient. A murmur moved through the room. Martin looked toward Daniel. This is your mother's revenge. She will destroy the company to punish you. Daniel stepped away from the wall. No. His voice was not loud, but the microphone carried the room's silence around it. Martin turned. Daniel approached the stage. She paid the employees you were willing to use as leverage, he said. She preserved the development options. She funded the restructuring. After creating panic. You created the panic. Martin's face became hard. I kept you alive. You kept me desperate. You signed every document. Yes. Daniel did not look away. I did. The admission changed the atmosphere more than any accusation could have. People expect guilty men to defend themselves. Daniel's refusal to do so left Martin alone with his own explanations. I signed documents I did not properly review, Daniel continued. I concealed the company's condition. I approved payments without verifying the services. And I sold my mother's home without her permission. A reporter raised a phone. Daniel glanced at it, then continued. I told myself I was saving Northline. The truth is, I was saving the version of myself that needed to be seen as successful. His voice shook. I hurt my employees. I betrayed my mother. And I made it easy for people around me to profit from my fear. For a second, I forgot the crowd. I saw the 9-year-old on the garage roof. The frightened boy falling toward me. But this time, I did not move to catch him. He had to land inside his own words. Martin walked toward him. Do you think this performance will make her forgive you? Daniel looked at me. No. The answer hurt, though it was correct. Then he faced Martin again. I think forgiveness is the last thing I should be asking for tonight. Martin's expression twisted. You are nothing without this company. Daniel breathed in. Then I'll have to find out what is left. I stepped toward the microphone. The interim board has completed its review of Northline's management. Daniel's face became still. He knew what came next. Effective tonight, Daniel Hart's employment with Northline Urban Development is terminated. A wave of whispers moved across the room. I forced myself to continue. He will retain no management authority, board seat, or company-funded benefits. His conduct will remain subject to civil and regulatory review. Daniel lowered his eyes. I wanted to say more. That he had cooperated. That he had finally told the truth. That he was my son. But accountability becomes meaningless when softened publicly for the people we love. So I said only what the decision required. Northline will continue under an independent executive team led by Nina Patel, subject to final board approval. Nina looked startled. Arthur smiled slightly. The employees near the terrace began applauding. Not loudly at first. Then more joined. The applause was not for me. It was for stability. For wages paid. For the possibility that their work might survive the people who had gambled with it. Daniel stepped away from the stage. I watched him move through the crowd alone. Firing him publicly was not a moment of triumph. It was the most expensive decision I made that year. And the cost had nothing to do with money. Martin attempted to leave. Ruth stopped him near the entrance. Mr. Vale, you have been served. She handed him 2 documents. The first was an amended civil complaint seeking to void the sale of my home based on fraud, falsified authority, unjust enrichment, and conspiracy. The second was a claim brought by Alder Crest and Northline concerning related party transfers, undisclosed conflicts, and recovery of improperly paid funds. Martin did not take the papers. Ruth placed them on the entry table. You've been served whether you hold them or not. He looked at me. You think buying a failing company makes you my boss? No. I stepped closer. Your company's contractual relationships with Northline make you subject to its audit, repayment claims, and litigation preservation requirements. That is not the same thing. No. I glanced at the documents. But it is close enough for this evening. His voice lowered. This house will never feel like yours again. The word struck where he intended. He saw it. For a moment, the old smile almost returned. Then I understood something. Martin had spent 40 years believing that causing pain gave him ownership of it. He thought every wound was a room he could enter whenever he wished. I looked around the entryway. At the paintings he had chosen. The polished furniture. The clock he had taken from my life and displayed inside his. The house is not mine because it contains only pleasant memories, I said. It is mine because I lived honestly inside them. I looked directly at him. You could stand in every room for the rest of your life and still be a visitor. His expression emptied. No smile. No clever response. Just an aging man standing beneath a clock that did not belong to him. The investigators approached. They asked Martin and Pike to accompany them to separate rooms for voluntary interviews. Their attorneys objected. The discussion remained controlled. No handcuffs. No shouted arrest. Real investigations rarely provide the theater people expect. They begin with documents, recorded questions, and people discovering that confidence is not evidence. Martin left the gala through the side entrance. The crowd watched him go. After the guests departed, I stood alone on the terrace. Workers removed empty glasses from the garden. The temporary canopy clicked softly in the wind. Beyond the cliffs, moonlight rested across the ocean. Daniel approached from inside. He had removed his jacket. For several seconds, he stood beside me without speaking. I suppose congratulations would sound strange, he said. Yes. You saved the company. The employees saved much of it by continuing to work while management failed them. He nodded. Nina deserves the job. She does. Was firing me at the gala necessary? There was no anger in his voice. Only pain. I answered honestly. Announcing the change was necessary after Martin publicly misrepresented control. Naming your responsibility was necessary because investors and employees had been deceived. In front of everyone? I did not describe everything you did. His mouth tightened. That is difficult to believe. I did not mention the hotel refund being absorbed by Northline's overdraft. I did not mention you knew Martin likely controlled Meridian before selling the house. I did not mention that you invoked your dead father to pressure me into silence. He looked toward the ocean. No. I protected what remained private without protecting you from the public consequences of your public decisions. He nodded slowly. That sounds like something you used to say in boardrooms. It probably is. Did you enjoy it? The question surprised me. Firing you? Yes. No. Did part of you enjoy beating Martin? I looked back toward the house. Yes. Daniel appreciated the honesty. I could see it. I'm sorry, he said. You have said that. I know. He placed both hands on the terrace rail. I keep trying to find a sentence large enough. There isn't one. What am I supposed to do? Live without expecting the pain to disappear because you finally understand it. His eyes filled. Will you ever forgive me? I had asked myself the same question every night. Sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes never. Both felt true. I may forgive you one day, I said. But forgiveness will not return the job, erase the legal consequences, or make me trust you with my life again. He wiped his face. What would trust look like? You doing the right thing when there is no chance I will see it. How long? I don't know. He looked down. That is fair. No. I thought of the piano. The dining table. The strangers opening my mother's letters at an auction warehouse. Fair would have been coming home and turning my key. We stood beside each other in silence. Not reconciled. Not separated. Something harder. A mother and son facing the distance one of them had created. After several minutes, Daniel walked away. This time, I did not call him back. The legal cases lasted 11 months. That is the part revenge stories usually leave out. They skip from evidence to justice as if courts operate on emotional certainty. Real justice requires filings. Hearings. Expert reports. Postponements. Invoices. Days when the truth feels obvious and weeks when procedure makes it feel unreachable. Graham Pike surrendered his license pending disciplinary proceedings. He eventually admitted that the expanded power of attorney page had been prepared after my signature and inserted at Martin's request. He claimed Daniel understood the authority was being broadened. Daniel claimed he believed Pike had confirmed my consent. The evidence supported neither version completely. That uncertainty followed my son into settlement negotiations. The financial investigation found that Martin and his related companies had received substantial undisclosed benefits from Shoreline. Some funds were recovered. Other claims continued. Martin was not led away in handcuffs from a courtroom. He agreed to a civil settlement without admitting every allegation. His companies returned money to Northline. He surrendered his remaining Meridian interest. He withdrew all applications connected to the coastal resort. And most importantly to me, the sale of my home was rescinded. The title returned to my name. I received the new keys on a cold morning in early spring. Ruth came with me. So did a locksmith, a structural inspector, and 2 attorneys. Romance becomes cautious after litigation. The front door opened with a soft scrape. Inside, the house smelled empty. Martin's furniture had been removed. Pale rectangles marked the walls where his paintings had hung. The grandfather clock remained in the hallway. It had stopped at 3:17. I walked from room to room. The kitchen. The sitting room. The upstairs bedroom where my mother had slept. Thomas's small workshop near the garage. The house had returned. But Martin had been right about one thing. It did not feel the same. For months, I had imagined stepping inside and experiencing relief. Instead, I felt like someone visiting a place reconstructed after a fire. The walls were present. The certainty was gone. Ruth followed me into the kitchen. "You don't have to live here again." "I know." "You could sell it." "I know." "You could rent it." "I know." She looked through the window toward the neglected rose garden. "What do you want?" For most of my adult life, I had known how to answer that question. I wanted stability. Education for Daniel. A secure retirement. A home where Thomas and I could grow old. But Thomas had not grown old with me. Daniel had confused security with an asset he could spend. And retirement had lasted less than 4 months before I purchased a distressed company. "I want the house to mean something beyond what happened here," I said. Ruth looked at me. "That sounds expensive." "It probably will be." Northline changed. We reduced the scale of the South Harbor development. The luxury marina disappeared from the plans. 2 residential towers became mixed-income housing. Local businesses received longer leases and relocation assistance. The public walkway remained. So did the rooftop gardens Daniel had included in his original concept. Not every part of his vision had been false. That was one of the more difficult truths to accept. A person can create something worthwhile and still behave terribly to preserve it. Nina became chief executive. She did not thank me for promoting her. She gave me a list of conditions. Independent compliance staff. Employee representation at quarterly board meetings. No family appointments. No special approval channels for Aldercrest. I accepted all of them. A company does not become ethical because a better person takes control. It becomes ethical when even the better person cannot act without limits. Aldercrest converted part of its debt into equity and became Northline's parent company. The financial press described the restructuring as an unusual rescue led by a retired turnaround specialist. One headline read, "Mother takes over son's company after property dispute." I hated it. It made the company sound like an argument at a dinner table. But perhaps that was easier to understand than lending facilities, governance rights, and institutional failures. People prefer family drama because balance sheets rarely confess their motives aloud. Daniel pleaded no contest to a reduced civil claim concerning breach of fiduciary responsibility and unauthorized disposal of property. He was ordered to pay restitution from the sale proceeds he had received. He lost most of his remaining Northline shares during the restructuring. He was not imprisoned. Some people believed he should have been. Others believed losing the company was punishment enough. Neither group had to decide whether to answer his calls on Sundays. For 6 months, I spoke to him only through attorneys when necessary. Then, one afternoon, Ruth handed me an envelope. Daniel had written rather than called. The letter contained no request for forgiveness. No explanation. No statement about how much he had suffered. He wrote that he had taken a temporary job coordinating maintenance for a nonprofit housing organization. The salary was modest. He rented a small apartment. He attended financial ethics counseling voluntarily and had begun paying restitution monthly. At the end, he wrote, "I used to think being your son meant I had to build something as impressive as your career. I understand now that I was using achievement to avoid becoming accountable. I don't expect you to trust this letter. I'm going to keep living in a way that may make it true eventually." I read it twice. Then placed it in the cedar chest. I did not answer that day. But I did not throw it away. The piano took longer to find. The auction house had sold it to a retired music teacher named Beatrice Cole. When she learned how it had reached the auction, she offered to return it immediately. I refused to take it without paying what she had spent restoring it. We argued politely for nearly 20 minutes. In the end, she accepted the restoration cost and invited me to hear one of her students play. The student was an 11-year-old girl with red glasses and nervous hands. She played the same simple waltz Thomas used to practice on Sunday mornings. Halfway through, she made a mistake and stopped. "I'm sorry," she said. Beatrice smiled. "Do not apologize to the music. Continue." The girl began again. I sat near the window and cried quietly. Not because the piano had returned. Because it had carried music while it was away. Loss had not frozen it. Another life had touched it carefully. That changed something in me. I donated the piano to a community arts program operated from my home. The dining room became a classroom. The upstairs bedrooms became temporary accommodation for older women facing housing fraud or financial abuse. Ruth called it the Hart House Legal and Retirement Resource Center. I disliked having my name on it. She said donors needed something to print on brochures. The rose garden returned. So did the dining table, after the restaurant owner agreed to sell it back for exactly what he had paid. I never found every letter. Some had been separated from the cedar chest and discarded. For a while, that loss consumed me. Then I began writing down the memories I could still recall. My mother's expressions. Thomas's jokes. Daniel's first day at school. The sound of rain against the roof before we repaired it. Memory is not preserved only by objects. Sometimes an object disappears and forces memory to learn how to stand without it. Nearly 2 years after the gala, Daniel asked to visit the house. Not as my son returning home. As a volunteer. The center needed someone to repair shelving in the legal resource room. He had experience coordinating maintenance. Ruth showed me his application. "You know we could hire someone else." "Yes. Nina says he has been reliable at the nonprofit." "I know. You have checked?" "Of course." Ruth smiled. "What? You are considering it." "I am considering shelves." "Certainly." Daniel arrived on a Saturday morning wearing old jeans and carrying a toolbox. He stopped at the front door. The same door I had stood outside when my key no longer worked. He did not enter until I invited him. "Thank you for letting me help," he said. "The shelves are upstairs." "I remember." We both became quiet. Then he corrected himself. "I remember where the room used to be." That distinction mattered. The room was no longer his childhood bedroom. It belonged to women who needed legal forms, secure computers, and a place to sit while deciding how to challenge people they loved. Daniel worked for 6 hours. He did not ask about the company. He did not ask whether I had forgiven him. At lunchtime, he ate a sandwich on the back steps with the other volunteers. Before leaving, he tightened the loose front door handle without telling me. I noticed after he was gone. Trust did not return. But something smaller appeared. Evidence. Martin sold his remaining coastal properties and moved away. I heard conflicting reports. That he lived in Florida. That he had gone overseas. That his wife had left him. That he was writing a book about unethical corporate takeovers. I never verified any of them. For most of my life, Martin had occupied more space in my mind than he deserved. First as a boy who taught me to fear hallways. Then as a man standing inside my home. Finally as an opponent I needed to understand. Defeating him did not erase what he had done. It simply ended his authority over what happened next. That was enough. On the second anniversary of the title being restored, I sat on the terrace at sunset. The center had closed for the evening. The last staff member had left. From inside, the grandfather clock marked 6. It had been repaired, though it still lost several minutes each week. Thomas would have said that was part of its character. Daniel had visited earlier to complete another volunteer shift. Before leaving, he placed an envelope beside me. Inside was a copy of the first restitution payment receipt marked "Final balance satisfied." There was also a note. I know repayment does not restore what I took. I only wanted you to know I finished what the court required. I will keep working on what it could not require. I held the note for a long time. Then I called him. He answered cautiously. Mom? The word sounded unfamiliar. Not because he had stopped using it. Because I had stopped allowing it to excuse him. I received your note, I said. Okay. You can come for dinner next Sunday. Silence. Then a breath. Are you sure? No. He almost laughed. Neither of us did. 6 o'clock, I said. Do not be late. I won't. And Daniel? Yes? This is dinner. I understand. It is not forgiveness. I understand that too. When the call ended, I remained on the terrace. The sky had turned orange above the water. Lights began appearing along the distant shore. For years, I believed blood loyalty meant protecting family from the world. I know differently now. Sometimes love means standing beside someone while they face consequences. Sometimes it means refusing to rescue them from the truth. And sometimes it means leaving a chair at the table. Without pretending the broken trust has already been repaired. My son sold the home I built for retirement because he believed his ambition was more valuable than my consent. Martin bought it because he believed humiliation would make him powerful. I bought their company because it was the only realistic way to stop both of them from destroying more lives. But the company was never the real victory. The real victory was learning that I did not need to become cruel to stop cruel people. I needed evidence. Patience. Boundaries. And the courage to let someone I loved experience the full weight of what he had done. The house stands on the cliff today. But it is no longer a monument to the retirement I imagined. Its rooms are filled with legal workshops, piano lessons, financial counseling, and women learning that age does not make their property, money, or choices available to their children. My future did not look the way I planned. It became something more useful. And perhaps that is the final cost of betrayal. You lose the life you expected. Then decide whether the life remaining will be shaped by what was taken. Or by what you choose to build next. So let me ask you honestly. If your own son sold your home and used your trust to save his failing company, would you eventually allow him back into your life? Or would some betrayals permanently end the relationship, no matter how deeply the person regretted them? Share your answer in the comments. And if this story made you think about the difference between forgiveness and accountability, subscribe and stay with me for the next story. Because sometimes the darkest family secrets are not hidden from strangers. They are hidden behind the doors we once believed were safest.